In this country, the government gives you an option. We will come and tax your money to do what we have to do, or here's an alternative. We won't tax you. We'll borrow it. 10 years later, we'll give it all back to you, and we'll pay you interest in the meanwhile every year. Every rich corporation and every rich person knows which way to choose on that three-card Monte operation. This is a joke.
The right is getting angrier and angrier. And because of Trump's betrayal of them, the Epstein files is the tip of the iceberg. The reason why it's so important is because it woke up a lot of Trump voters like, oh, Trump might be lying too. Oh, Trump said he was against the establishment, but it might turn out it was just a more sophisticated trick, and he is the establishment. Until you get the money out of politics, all of our, like not all, but 95% of our politicians, maybe even 98%, are deeply corrupt.
Today, I'm talking to Professor Richard Wolff and Cenk Uygur. Richard Wolff is Professor of Economics Emeritus, University of Massachusetts Amherst. He is a visiting professor in the graduate program in International Affairs at the New School University. He's also the co-founder of Democracy at Work and host of their weekly national radio and TV show called Economic Update. Cenk Uygur is the founder and host of The Young Turks, a progressive news show which has over 27 million subscribers across social media platforms, with their content being viewed over 29 billion times. So, Professor Wolff, if I can start with you. Recently, Trump passed his so-called Big Beautiful Bill, which increases the debt ceiling at least $2.4 trillion over the next 10 years. What's your thoughts on this particular bill, but also in general? What will happen to America if they just keep on borrowing?
Well, those are big questions. Let me try to unpack them a little bit with you. The United States is the largest debtor country in the world and has been for quite a while. Its debt is now exceeding its GDP, which is normally in the profession a bit of a sign that you better be careful about what you're doing with your deficit finance. Here in the United States, these two cautions no longer hold back a large portion of our political leadership in both parties, I might add. So that their behavior has been, and under Trump continues to be, we are not bound by any of these constraints, partly because so much of the world's debt is in the form of obligations in dollar terms, mostly by the U.S. Treasury. So we're free to do pretty much what we want. And so it's a politician's dream. They can give to their donor base the tax cuts that they want and that they pay for with their donations, and without a limit, apparently. That big, beautiful bill you referred to, its most important provision is ending the sunset clause that was attached to it back in 2017 when it was first passed. All those tax cuts then for corporations and the rich were set to expire on the last day of this year. And this big new bill takes away that expiration date. And so they can go on forever. And it adds a whole new collection on top of that. At the same time, it cannot raise taxes on the mass of people because that's politically no longer feasible, at least not in the short run. So they are stuck with having to continue to expand the debt. Hence, your opening line here. We have a government cutting the taxes of corporations and the rich, dare not tax the masses, dare not cut programs as much as they might like, certainly not enough to prevent the debt from getting worse. So they do what most Republican governments do, make a big noise about fiscal responsibility, but never follow through. In fact, increase the debt, run the big deficits. They're bigger now than they've ever been in the last few years. So we're seeing quite conventional Republican activity, although dressed up as if it were a great new Trumpian alternative. It isn't. It's very old. if there's anything new, it's the gimmick, which isn't going to work and isn't working yet. It's a gimmick which is to maneuver so that you do limit the extra debt by getting the rest of the world to pay tariffs to get into the United States, and to give them some new revenue, tariff revenue, to supplement what they are unwilling to get from their own people in an income tax. And you know how the tariffs work. They're paid by American companies that import anything. And those companies will, once they have to pay that tax, do everything in their power, either to shift it to the mass of the American people, giving us an inflation, or squeeze the origin countries to lower their prices. Either way, it's Republicans lifting the tax burden off the corporations and the rich and spreading it to the mass of Americans or to foreigners. And this is called making America number one.
Cenk, I guess I'll pass to you the question as well. What do you think specifically of the Big Beautiful Bill, but also the same question, what will happen if America keeps on borrowing?
Yeah, I mean, here I agree with Professor Wolff 100%. There's no way of disputing the things that he said. Those are all facts, and that's exactly what we said on the Young Turks. But I'll layer on top of it. So the Republicans are monumentally full of crap. They never balance the budget. The last Republican to leave office with a balanced budget was Dwight Eisenhower. Okay, so the Republicans have caused the great majority of the deficit and the debt. And last time Trump was in office, he put 8.4 trillion onto the debt, which is a monster number in 4 years. This time he's already put 4 trillion more onto the debt. So he's responsible for about 12 and a half out of the 37 trillion in just 5 years. It's unbelievable. It's an unprecedented giveaway to the rich from a party that loves unprecedented giveaways to the rich and corporations. But nevertheless, he's broken every record there is. And now, but let's turn to the Democrats, right? So Democrats do have a leg to stand on here in some ways, in other ways, not at all, right? So to be fair, Clinton and Obama did reduce the deficit. From their first year to their last year, Clinton reduced it by 150%. He actually turned it into a surplus. That actually is possible in that case. And Obama reduced it by 50%. So pretty good record there. And leagues above, planets above the Republicans. So mainstream media, look, on almost every issue tells you the exact opposite of what's true. So they tell you that Republicans care about balanced budgets and the debt, when that's the exact opposite of the truth. They don't care about it at all. All they care about is tax cuts and corporate giveaways. On the other hand, now when you look at the discredit for the Democrats, so George W. Bush passed a massive tax cut for the rich. It was even bigger than the one that Trump passed in his first term. But they couldn't make it permanent. And who made it permanent? Barack Obama and Joe Biden, quietly, in the middle of the night. Obama sent Biden to negotiate with McConnell, and Biden gave away the store because they're on the same team. Biden was known as the senator from MBNA, and that's a credit card company. His main calling card throughout his career has been serving the donors more effectively than any other Democrat. So he did a deal where the rich got to keep, the top 1% got to keep over 90% of the gains. Okay. So, and since Obama and Biden did it, the press was silent about it. No big deal, didn't even happen. And that added trillions more to the debt, right? And all in service always of the rich and the donor class and corporations. So lastly, on the debt, we get to corporations. It was 35% rate when Trump came in. He brought it down to 21%. Biden says, I'm going to bring it up to 28%. Wait, it was at 35. What do you mean you're going to bring it back up to 28? And then Joe Manchin says, no way, 25. Biden goes, immediately, 25. It was at 35. Now we're talking about 25. Okay, good. Did you introduce a bill to get it to 25 even? No. Just lying about it. Never did anything about it at all, right? So both parties have added on to the debt for one specific reason, to pay back the people who bribed them. And the number one set of people that bribed them is corporations. So corporate donors come in. I mean, we have $17 billion in oil subsidies every year. Why? They're the most profitable companies in the world. and let alone the fact that they're creating climate change and putting all their costs on us. Why does Bob and Sally in Kansas have to take money out of their hard-earned paycheck to give to ExxonMobil as a gift? As a gift. That is insane. We can't negotiate drug prices. We're forced to pay for a genocide. All of this is utter corruption. So I don't see any daylight between me and Professor Wolff on this issue.
So I would ask you, so you've got all of this debt, so how do you lower it, like Professor Wolff said, politically? Is it, I was going to ask you, like, do you do like something like Doge or anything like that? Or are you saying that really what you need to do is just get rid of Citizens United first?
Oh, 100%. That it's not. Look, guys, sometimes people that don't fully understand politics frustrate me because they're like, okay, let's get to money out of politics fourth. Well, then you're never going to get to it because you're never going to pass the first three bills. Everything is money in politics. There's only one issue. If you can't take money out of politics, they're always going to serve the people who bribe them. So today on the Young Turks, we're live at 6 o'clock Eastern. We're going to do a story about how AIPAC is the number one donor to 100% of Republican leadership in Congress, and they're the number one donor to 75% of Democratic leadership. They're the number one donor in this election cycle. Normally, it's Big Pharma, but in this 2024 cycle, it was AIPAC, right? So you think, and then Israel says, hey, give me $500 million more in the middle of a genocide. The vote was 422 to 6, saying, yes, sir, of course, sir, we'd love to fund your genocide, sir. Bob and Sally are making too much money in Kansas. Let's take away some of their food. Let's take away some of their rent, right? And give it to Israel to commit a genocide. Give it to drug companies, give it to oil companies, etc. So until you get the money out of politics, all of our, like not all, but 95% of our politicians, maybe even 98%, are deeply corrupt. Stop listening to mainstream media. They are not the best of us. They are the absolute worst of us. They're the people that out of 330 million people raised their hands and said, I will work for money. I'm holding an open auction. I'm basically a prostitute. You pay me money, I give you bills back. I rob the American people on your behalf. That is what 95% of politicians in this country do. You have to get the money out. If you don't have honest representatives, you're never going to win on any of these issues. So we should all focus all of our energy on that. By the way, there's a website, there's a group I formed, Wolfpack. They're fighting so hard for this. Please join them, fightcorruption.us, fightcorruption.us. So, but if you do get the money out, what happens? Well, we already know what happens for two reasons. Because it seems like we've lived in a world in the last 20, 30, 40 years where progress seems impossible. Serving the American people seems impossible. The rich and the powerful always win, right? That's because of money and politics. But there actually was a world between 1938 and 78 where we did not have Citizens United or Buckley or Bellotti. The Supreme Court had not legalized bribery yet. And in that 40 magical years, we created the greatest middle class the world has ever seen, the greatest economy the world has ever seen, and the American government, at least on the economic front, largely worked. It was amazing. The results were amazing. Okay, and then the second part is when you have uncorrupted politicians today, people who don't take corporate PAC money. So just Democrats don't take corporate PAC money, Ro Khanna, et cetera. Now my new PAC, Rebellion PAC, they don't take corporate PAC money. And lo and behold, even with Republicans, Josh Hawley and Matt Gaetz for like a minute, Tom Massey, now Republicans wind up being more hypocrites because Hawley wound up voting for that atrocious bill while complaining about it, so fraud in that case. But there are other bills where Hawley, Gaetz, and the other guys not taking corporate PAC money, as bad as they are on other issues, we're like, yeah, wait, why are we taking from the middle class and giving to the rich? And they flipped their positions. The Justice Democrats, again, if you're on the right or in the middle and you don't agree with some of the squad's goals, et cetera, no problem, guys. That's not about this. It's about honest politicians like Massey and Ro Khanna going, I don't work for corporations. I don't work for the donors. I work for you. And whenever they do that, even if you disagree on social issues or other policies, they're actually trying to pass bills that help the average American and not the donor class. It's the money, Lebowski. It's not complicated.
Professor, would you say that that's also the first thing that you need to focus on? We'll get back to Cenk and Professor Wolff in a minute. Do you ever feel like the news is only telling one side of the story? That's where today's sponsor, Ground News, comes in. It's a platform that helps you become a more conscious and better informed news consumer. And it's not just me who finds it valuable. Even the Nobel Peace Center, the official museum of the Nobel Peace Prize, described ground news as an excellent way to stay informed, avoid echo chambers, and expand your worldview. Here's how it works. Ground news pulls together thousands of news sources and lays them out side by side. For each story, you get a bias rating, a factuality score, and a breakdown of how outlets across the political spectrum are covering it, so you always have full transparency of what you're reading. My favourite feature is a blind spot feed. It highlights stories that are widely reported by one side of the political spectrum, but barely mentioned by the other. As you can see, each story shows what outlets are covering it. Some are heavily covered by the right, some are heavily covered by the left, and some by the centre. This is a simple but effective way to step outside your bubble and discover perspectives and news stories that you might otherwise miss. If you want a more balanced and transparent news experience, head to ground.news/Ellie and get 40% off the Vantage plan. You'll get unlimited access, and it will change the way that you consume the news for the better. Check it out, it's a game changer. Now, let's get back to the discussion.
Well, it's certainly among the very, very important ones. Let me, in turn, layer a little bit on Cenk. I agree with what he's said there, and it is worse than he says, and he says it's really bad. But I would only go a step further, and let me be my economic self for a minute, and let's go through it just briefly what is going on here. The federal government, faced with all the issues it faces, could tax corporations and the rich. Let's be really clear, because one of the things that Cenk correctly celebrates about that period back before 1978 was one of the remarkable things at that time was that the tax rate on corporate profits was much higher than it is today. And the tax rates at the higher income, individual income level, much higher than it is today. So it's not as though we have no evidence. It's not as though we have no experience. It's not as though taxing corporations and the rich is some terribly radical new idea. It's none of those. It's an old idea for which we have much evidence, and we could and we should be talking about it in this country. But it's worse than that. Because here comes the economics. If you don't tax corporations and the rich, and if you can't offload that tax burden onto the mass of people because you've already been doing that for a century, then you end up borrowing the money. That's what a deficit means. The government spends and borrows what it refuses to tax from the corporations and the rich, whose taxes have been lowered. Well, now I want to remind everyone, ask yourself a simple question. Where does the government go to borrow the money that it must borrow because it doesn't tax corporations and the rich? And here's the answer to save you time. It goes right back to the same corporations and the same rich people borrowing from them the money it did not tax from them. You understand? That's criminal hustle. Every rich corporation and every rich person in America who's even a little bit honest knows what I just said. They know that in this country, the government gives you an option. We will come and tax your money to do what we have to do, or here's an alternative. We won't tax you. We'll borrow it. 10 years later, we'll give it all back to you, and we'll pay you interest in the meanwhile every year. Every rich corporation and every rich person knows which way to choose on that three-card Monte operation. This is a joke. We live, and Cenk is good in articulating it, we live in a society where the only thing exceeding the grossness of its fiscal situation is the hypocrisy with which they cover it over as if it were something other than the straight-out robbery that it is.
So what about, so you said that 50 years ago, there was much higher taxes and the economy was doing really well. So maybe I'll ask you, because some would say it's just a completely different era of time. So for example, in the UK, they put the taxes, so they changed the whole non-dom status thing, And now 16,000 millionaires this year are running away. So they're rich. They're getting their taxes up, so they're running away to a different country which has less taxes. What's your response to that?
With all due respect to the great country of Great Britain, you do not play the role in the world that you once did. Your empire is gone. Ours is in the process of following you into the dustbin of history, but we in America don't face up to that any more than we face up to the shenanigans of our fiscal system. But here's the reality. If billionaires based in this country were to start leaving, then we have the power as a nation to say two things to them. You can go. Your wealth, that which is here, it's going to stay. And you know why? Because you are evading your responsibilities. Number two, if you are involved in a business that depends on the United States in one way or another, you're not going to be able to recover that situation. If in no other way, because a new president will go around the country telling everybody what has been done by these individuals associated with these companies. You want to see what will happen to American businesses? They're learning now what happens if you run afoul. The man learning it is named Elon Musk. And his company is rushing into the toilet because of his falling afoul, in this case, not of the country, but of the leader of this country at this current time. But it's a good lesson in what could happen if a different leader with a different agenda were to say, wait a minute here, you can't walk away of a century of this behavior. It's not just what you did last year. We're talking about the accumulation of something that has to really be set right. They may be able to walk away and not worry about what England might do, all due respect, but they can't do that with the United States, and they know it. Moreover, for many of them, being in New York or LA or wherever they are has meaning on many, many levels. And we're not talking about a tax that takes away everything from them. We're talking about a fair rate of taxation that could be developed. And I think many of them are more than willing. Warren Buffett keeps telling us he's more than willing. He's not the only one. And here's the last one which I love. If you walk away from your tax obligations, then we, the government of the United States, we will be happy. Say goodbye to you. Take some of your wealth with you. But your factory, your office, your store, we're going to convert them into worker co-ops. We're going to fund them, and we're going to keep the business going. And if you try to compete with what's left here from abroad, we will make sure that the American people know which are the businesses who stayed here, which are the businesses who provided jobs for all those people, and which are the businesses who took off to escape their taxes. You want that publicity? We'll give it to you in spades. No, we are not powerless. The game of threatening we will leave only lasts so long as you can't think about all the things we might do if you actually come through on that threat. And I can assure you, I've made this speech enough times. They stop and they begin to worry.
Cenk, what do you think about that? And also, just to ask you previously about Citizens United, it's in the amendment. Like, how can you change if it's the most important thing? How can you change that? Because we both know how hard it is to get that done.
All right, so there's a lot to address there, but first. So I'm a capitalist, and I don't want to speak for Dr. Wolff. So, Dr. Wolff, what would you call yourself?
I have no idea. I never understand the question, John. So tell me what you mean, and maybe
socialist, communist, Marxist.
I have learned from Marx a great deal, but I've also learned from Adam Smith and David Ricardo a great deal. I know it's fashionable in this country to pretend that you don't know or care or learn from the other side. I'm not into that. I don't care. I'm a professor. I've been able to do that all my life. So do I take Marxism seriously? You bet.
Okay, so you see, Dr. Wolff has a very significant critique of capitalism, right? So what's interesting, the reason I pointed that out is how much we agree, right? Because these are core political problems, and they're hurting. We agree on the problem 100%, and there's so much we agree on the solution too. Because this is you don't my part of my point is that if you're made uncomfortable by either capitalism or Marxism, you don't really have to worry about any of that. The answers are so common sense, middle ground, that once you realize the robbery that's going on, you can't unsee the robbery, right? And so, whether you're socialist or capitalist, why do you want to be robbed? You don't want to be robbed, right? So, neither side of the way of you thinking about economics gets you to a point where the American people go, "Oh yeah, it'd be amazing if we got robbed by the rich," right? And so now let's talk about that. So first of all, on Citizens United, um, yeah, there's you can't pass a bill that'll do it, in my opinion. Professor Larry Lessig at Harvard has some ideas on bills that could be 70, 80, 90% effective if you ask him, but I really don't think so. And I respect Professor Lessig so much. He's taught me so much about this campaign finance movement. He's the godfather of that movement, but I don't think bills are going to get the job done. And if you're waiting for the Supreme Court to become uncorporate, do you have a century? Forget decades. Do you have a century, right? Because the Democrats keep putting corporate people on the court too. Not as much as the Republicans, but yes, it's nearly impossible to overcome when the politicians appointing the court are corporate, right? Are corporatists. So, and by the way, and I think Professor Wolff and I would agree 100% on this too, I despise corporatism. And if you're a real capitalist, you would also despise corporatism. That is when corporations take over. It's corporate rule, it's oligarchy, it's what we have now. What we have now is not capitalism, it's corporatism. Okay, so the only way to overturn that is an amendment. So an amendment, it goes above the Supreme Court. And if you make it absolutely clear, they should not, our politicians should not be financed through private interests. So I believe in private capital and private interests, but I don't believe that private capital should be able to purchase the government. You should be able to purchase cars and houses and yachts and whatever the hell you like, okay? But not politicians. They're supposed to be our representatives. Democracy is supposed to check capitalism. It's supposed to make sure it doesn't devolve into corporatism, okay? At a bare minimum. So, but can you get an amendment? Fightcorruption.us. Yes, you can. Yes, you can. I'm positive you can. The main drug they use for opiate of the masses these days is mainstream media telling you that nothing is possible. Sit back down on your couch and accept corporate rule. Nothing is possible. It's not true. It's definitely possible. Now, to your earlier question that Professor Wolff addressed. So sometimes it'll be absurd. We covered this on the Young Turks. Gas companies threatened to leave Pennsylvania if they passed a tiny little extra tax on fracking. And they said, we're going to take our business elsewhere. I'm like, where are you going to take it? The gas is under Pennsylvania. Like it's like you can't go anywhere else for it. It's a giant reservoir under Pennsylvania. So it's the emptiest threat in the world. You only make that threat if you think the mainstream media is a joke and you think the rest of the politicians are in your pocket already. Because you just need one person to go, hey, brother, where are you going? Like, it doesn't make any sense. And right now, with Mamdani winning in the New York Democratic primary, businesses are, we're going to move out of New York if you pass an extra 2 to 4% in taxes in New York. Really? You're going to move Wall Street? To Professor Wolff's point, I mean, UK, wonderful, used to lead the world, right? But Wall Street's Wall Street. You're going to move Wall Street, where are you going to move it to? You're not going to move Wall Street. Okay, nonsense, right? So now, look, I'm probably more moderate in this regard than Professor Wolff, but I don't want to speak for him. But is there a tax rate that's too high? Yeah, of course. There's a tax rate that's too high, right? And so, but then the next question we probably do agree on, which is, are we anywhere near the tax rate that is too high? No, We're not within a million miles of it, right? But at the same time, I understand the frustration that the right, the middle, and even the left these days has with higher taxes, which is, yeah, but we're raising the taxes to do what? All we ever do is just give it back to the rich or give it to defense companies and oil companies and foreign governments and stuff. So even if we raise the taxes, they just take that and give it to their donors anyway, right? So it's like you're caught in this catch-22 that's so maddening, that's so frustrating. So is there a better way? Absolutely. Okay. So first of all, again, let me back up what Professor Wolff is saying. Warren Buffett has a line that I love so much, and as a capitalist, I understand it so well, and true capitalists would totally agree, right? And he's like, look, man, if slightly higher taxes gets you to not invest in something, then you're not really an investor and you're not really a capitalist. Like, oh, I don't want to make money because you'll take 2% more of it afterwards. Said no capitalist ever. Okay. So it's just a lie. It's the demigod of capitalism. Warren Buffett is calling it a lie. It's obviously a lie. Any capitalist in their right mind wants to make a profit, even if the government takes 2% extra or honestly 20% extra. So does it affect risk around the edges? Yes. But again, you're talking about extreme cases we're nowhere near. Now, second thing is worldwide, they did an agreement that was fantastic recently that almost no one talks about. 15% minimum tax on corporations worldwide. Okay. And by the way, if you're wondering, like I gave Biden a lot of credit because I was like, well, look, he hasn't done anything with corporate taxes that he promised, but he did pass this legislation that says corporations have to at least pay 15%, right? And I was like, oh, that's really positive. I'm surprised Biden, who's very pro-corporate, as corporatist president as it almost gets, did that. And it turns out it wasn't Biden. It was the world community that got together and said, they're robbing us all. They're just switching around. They're going to Ireland. They're going to Norway. They're Netherlands, they're going to Cayman Islands. And no, we all have to do a bare minimum of 15%. So can the world unite around issues like that? Well, they just did. So obviously they can. So we can have that conversation so they don't just keep running from one country to another. And finally, there's something called middle out economics. Okay. That's instead of trickle down is we give everything to the rich and then they trickle all over you for the next couple of decades and laugh their ass off. Right, and they get these paid stooges in mainstream media to go, oh yeah, if you put $4 trillion hole in the debt, it'll be fine because later the rich will trickle on you, and it'll create more money. Did it ever in the last 50 years? Has it ever worked? No, never worked. But the morons on television don't know anything about the news. They just are handed a script. They read it off the teleprompter. Trickle-down economics. When you get the trickle on your head, it's fantastic. Enjoy it. Like, it's just nothing but propaganda, right? So if you did instead breaks that are designed for the middle class, like earned income tax credit, that's for the working poor, right? Now, that's not middle class, but they're working poor. You can't get it without working, right? If you did higher minimum wage, not only does that push up everybody, it would transfer $92 billion from corporate executives and shareholders to hardworking Americans that are working for minimum wage. $92 billion. And that's why the corporations always kill it. That's why it was the very first thing Joe Biden took out of his first bill, because he's a giant liar, and he was never going to allow a $92 billion transfer to the working poor in this country, okay? So if you do things like that, though, not only does it get to the people making $15, but it also pushes wages up above that. You want that. And then they say, well, that'll drive up inflation. No, we already had inflation. That'll help you keep up with inflation. But whenever you talk about giving away to the corporations, they're like, you have to do it. To the rich, you have to do it. Whenever you talk about giving anything to the middle class or the poor, they're like, oh, that'll drive up inflation. That'll drive up the debt. I mean, they're such obvious liars. It's preposterous how obvious the lies are. And any time that middle out economics has been tried, including 1938 to 78, roughly speaking, in America, it has worked spectacularly. Structure the bills to help the average American, and you'll have a much healthier and stronger economy. So I'm not just saying that for justice sake and for a better economy, but it also goes to answering your question. If we have the world's greatest economy, then that draws in corporations, that draws in businesses. So instead of, this idea that, oh my God, they'll all run away and they all live in the Cayman Islands. No, when you create an economy that works that well, it becomes a magnet that draws in more business, not less business.
Professor, if you want to respond, and also if I could just go back to Cenk's question before about socialism and capitalism, not to ask you which one you are, but can you define what Marxism is and what socialism, just define what those words even mean in the first place?
Sure, I'd be glad to. But before, let me respond a little bit to what Cenk said, because he's right in what he says, but there's a little bit of a failure of imagination in our society. We're so hemmed in by the media and how it is all dealt with that we don't ask questions that are really very basic and very simple. I keep noticing this when I talk to high school students who ask all those questions and do so with an honesty and a directness that is then disappearing as they get older, which worries me a lot. Let me give you an example. According to the people who run this country, we are engaged in a great struggle with the People's Republic of China for the future. And we are needing to get our allies together to confront a worse Cold War than the one we just had with the Soviet Union after World War II, et cetera, et cetera. Okay, let's assume they mean that. Let's assume that there's something to it. How then would you explain a president of the United States declaring tariff war on every other country in the world, leading with our closest allies, including Great Britain, Canada, Mexico, Europe? You're destroying the alliance when you just said you need it more than ever. You're pivoting to Asia, and the BRICS has already taken half of Asia away from you. What are you talking? What kind of crazy? Well, if you understand that that's nuts, that is a fundamental misunderstanding of how the world works, then you won't be so surprised when Cenk says this is all crazy. There's this fiscal game playing that the Republicans and the Democrats do. And let me tell you that beyond anything else, there are some things that are so gross that they need to be called out. The last time the minimum wage was raised, and Cenk's comment reminded me, was in 2009, when it was raised to the lofty level of $7.25 an hour. Put away that that's an insult to the human being in this country with its prices at this time. Put away that half the states of the union were so grossed out that they've developed state-level minimum wages much higher, including 2 times and more higher than $7.25. But neither Republicans nor Democrats have raised it since 2009. I'm an economist. Let me tell you, prices rose every year since 2009. Sometimes a little, sometimes a lot. But during all those price rises, 16 years of them, we didn't give the poorest workers amongst us an extra friggin' nickel. What mentality? What is that? And again, Cenk's right. It's not about Republican, Democrat, capitalist, or socialist. What? And you give away massive amounts of money to the richest, and you can't improve the minimum wage of $7, which is, as we speak, it's still $7.25 an hour. I don't have the poetic words enabling me to ascribe the horror. When that kind of a person who's voted that way tells me about what the rich may or may not do if we were to dare to tax them, how come he's not worried about what those poor people might do if you don't give them a decent wage? Well, maybe that's the answer. Maybe that's what we have to wait for those people to finally articulate with their pitchforks what they think of the priorities of the society that we're in. All right, as to Marxism, have I learned from Marx? A great deal. But I had to learn it on my own. I was born in Ohio. I'm an American. I've lived and worked here all my life. And I'm a product of the American educational system. In fact, I'm a product of what passes for the elite of this system. I went to Harvard, then I went to Stanford, and I finished at Yale. It's like a joke. I'm a poster boy for elite education. They tried very hard, and I had some good teachers. They tried very hard to make me love capitalism as the ultimate the human species could achieve. They tried hard. They did a good job, but they also failed. I don't think it's the end of the human experience. If you ask me the question, can we do better than capitalism? My answer is, you bet. We can, and I'm confident that we will. That's my confidence in human creativity. Slaves were able to say, we can do better than slavery. Serfs were able to say, we can do better than feudalism. And the employee class in our society can and will do better than capitalism. But whether you agree on that point or not, we are at a point where the future is no longer the debate point. This is a system that is, in my opinion, imploding on itself. It doesn't want to face it. It can't yet go beyond denial. I'm married to a psychotherapist, so the concepts of denial are part of my life, right? So she has taught me over my lifetime to be aware of how and why people do it, and I have compassion. It was much better in the 20th century when the empire was going up than the ride is when the empire is going down. But every empire has had both of them, and we're not exempt from it either. And I think that's what's happening. And the trouble we're in is because we don't face it. We can't discuss, hey, we got to change how we divide the wealth, how we divide the decision making in enterprise. All of these things that may have been basic for a long time are now at risk of imploding. And it's time, past time, to ask basic questions. No one ever assigned me a word of Karl Marx at Harvard, Stanford, and Yale. I had to do that all on my lonesome with a few other students who had the same interest. And I learned a lot. And I can tell you, if my teachers had learned with me, they would have done a much better job of fixing the American economy 20, 10, and 5 years ago than they did. We are all the losers because they don't want to look at the critics. Critics figure things out about something. That's why we have them. We ask them to help us see what we might otherwise not want to look at. You need the critic, even if you're angry at them sometimes, even if they deserve to be angry at. I get that. But we shut them down in the Cold War, and we are now paying a very heavy price for having done that.
Cenk, so looking at what the professor said, looking past the current, like just, we need to get, you need to get rid of Citizens United, raise tax, but looking past that, what would be the ideal system to live in? Like, would it be pure capitalism? Would it be a mix of socialism, capitalism? What would you say?
Yeah, so I want to take it one thing at a time. But first, there's this remarkable agreement and disagreement between Professor Wolff and I. Like, we come at it from, I'm going to tell you a story that gives you a sense of how different our perspective is while we come to the same conclusions. And that's what's so interesting about this, right? So, but I'll get to that in a second. First, the minimum wage. If you make $7.25 an hour for the whole year, you work no vacation days, 40 hours a week, 52 weeks in a year, you make a little over $15,000 for the year. Who the hell can live on that?
That's by the way, below the poverty line.
Not even close. That's right. And by the way, 2009 is misleading. It's true, but it was passed under Bush, not under Obama. It just happened to be executed under Obama. Right. So Obama had 8 years and didn't raise it a nickel. Biden had 4 years, didn't raise it a nickel. OK, these guys are corporatists. They're playing good cop, bad cop on you. OK, yeah, I vote Democrat because the good cop is slightly better than the bad cop, but it's a false choice to begin with. OK,
yep,
so now places where we agree and disagree. So first, my wife is also a therapist, and I went to Wharton in Columbia Law. So we've got 4 Ivies and a Stanford covered between us, and we're both, having been the product of this, elite education, have come to the conclusion that the elite are full of crap. Okay, but look at how different where we come at it from, because at Wharton, funny enough, they did teach Marxism. And you might be surprised by that. Not for long, but it was a chapter that we were reading under, and we studied it in Management 101, okay? Because what they were showing us was different economic models. And so, and this is the part where now, and Professor Wolff and I have debated this a long time ago, but so if you're on his side on the socialism, you're not gonna like this story, okay? So our TA, it was actually, I think, huge class at Wharton, Management 101, almost everyone's taking it. We get to Marxism, and he does the simplistic, and that's what Professor Wolff has said before, the simplistic explanation of, you work as hard as you can and take as little as you need, right? And so that's supposed to be the central tenet. Again, there's a lot of nuance there. Professor Wolff can explain, right? But so, and that's what they explain the Soviet Union is based on, and centralized planning, and how the government's got it all figured out, et cetera. And I raised my hand and I said, can we just move on to the next chapter, because this shit is definitely not going to work, okay? And the TA said, oh, so you think you know better than Karl Marx? And I said, if he believes that, then yes. The whole class laughs, right? And so, I get it. I'm saying, no, sorry, but it's not going to work. I just don't think that that's the right model, right? And so I think and by the way, he said, well, the Soviet Union is the second largest and most powerful nation and empire in the world. What do you think is going to happen then? Because remember, I'm taking the class in 1988. That's how old I am, okay? And I said, I think they'll collapse. And they collapsed, okay? So look at how different my perspective is, right? But I come to the same conclusions about trying different things, okay? And not demagoguing. So Professor Wolff and I disagree on it. So what? Did the world melt? No, right? So, okay, China and us are in an economic battle. Do we have to make it a military battle? No. Why? Why do we have to make it a military battle? But constantly, they're our biggest threat. They're our biggest threat. We got to bring in aircraft carriers. Why do we have to bring in aircraft carriers when we're trying to compete on who sells more microchips? It makes no sense at all. Always a militaristic thing. And part of the reason for that is feed the defense contractors, just pigs at the trough, right? And so, and by the way, our system will collapse if we allow these pigs at the trough to eat everything up and leave nothing for anyone else. This is corporatism. This is the opposite of, in my opinion, Marxism. It's corporatism run amok. Corporations have taken over everything, and they're swallowing us and the whole country whole. And the number one tool they have for that is not politicians who are waiters and waitresses. And I feel bad, besmirching waiters and waitresses. So the politicians are servants. Okay, they're happy, dutiful servants of the rich. So they're almost irrelevant. They're just a proxy, right? But the people that are relevant is the media. And they're the most powerful and important corporations of all, because they're the ones that lull you back to sleep. Oh, yeah, you should have corporate rule. Oh, it's great if the defense contractors get all this. Oh, you should hate the Chinese. You shouldn't just compete with them economically. You should hate them. You should hate the Iranians. You should hate everyone. Hate everyone, right? And so, look, I don't think China is going to win, and partly because I think it's centralized planning. I think India is going to win in the long run, 100 years, 200 years from now. They have a chaotic energy, and you want to talk about capitalism. In so many ways, India is capitalism on steroids. But they have not gotten to corporatism yet, where corporatism comes and chokes off all the competition, chokes off the free market, and you have no options at all. Since they haven't gotten there yet, they have an unbelievable economic energy in India. So I think that'll win. But that's an interesting and different debate, right? So when we look at all this, for us here in America, we don't have to get into these. And again, Professor Wolff is right about, wait, if your top economic enemy or what opponent or however you want to characterize it is China, and China is now moving around you to get to Europe and cut you out of the equation, why would you, and Japan and South Korea, why would you then attack Europe and Japan and South Korea? Are you insane? And as a capitalist, I'm like, no, what are you doing? Why are you costing us our allies? Then we're not going to get the economic deals. We're not going to get the trade deals. BRICS is. And BRICS has China, it has Brazil, Russia, super important, now added Iran and so many others, super important, but it has China and India in it.
Right.
They're going to win. Are you insane? What are you doing? Right? So we have to have a much better strategy for serving the American middle class and making us competitive. So when you compete with China, we will also lose the economic race, let alone military or other nonsense stuff that they talk about. We'll lose the economic race if we don't get our head out of our ass, and if we don't stop the pigs from eating everything in the trough and from taking and taking, so that the American worker is down to $15,000 a year. Now they're buying all our homes. Private equity is buying all our homes. But guys, again, from a capitalist point of view, if you allow the bankers to buy your residential real estate, that is the main wealth creation in this country for the middle class. They're going to rob you of the only way you can accumulate wealth in the middle class. Not the only way, but the major way. 90% of the wealth we accumulate is in the houses. Once private equity is doing something logical, they're like, oh, wait, why would we let the average American accumulate that wealth? We should accumulate that wealth. So they're going and buying all the homes. So if you don't stop them, they'll turn us all into, first of all, the pricing is going up, because now there's more demand, because you're competing against not Bob and Sally moving into the neighborhood. You're competing with JP Morgan Chase. You're competing with Blackstone, BlackRock, some of the biggest private equity guys in Ohio. You're going to compete with them. So that's why housing prices are going up. Who's talking about that in media? Who's talking about that among the politicians? A handful, Ro Khanna, etc. But outside of that, no, corporate media is burying the lead. They're going to take all of our money. They're going to take our houses. And then we could become renters. And then that's it. Once we become renters, you can't create wealth, and you then are wedded to your job more. We're already are wedded to our chained to our jobs. And I'm telling you that as a guy who runs a company. I'm the CEO of a company. But it's insane to say your health care, and hence the lives of your family, is connected to your company, to your corporation. And if you leave the corporation, you might die, or your daughter might die. That's insane. That's not normal. No other developed nation has that. We're corporatism on steroids, right? And now what they'll say is, well, now you got to pay the rent and you don't have any wealth. So that's another giant chain, or I'd say around your midsection, but it's actually around your throat. And eventually they choke you off to the point, well, we'll collapse as an empire, collapse as a country. And it actually doesn't even help the rich. But the problem is, human beings are built on greed. We're built on many other wonderful things too, but that greed is insatiable for the rich. It's our job to stop them, to put a check on it. I believe in what I call democratic capitalism. Democracy must check capitalism. Otherwise, capitalism is going to turn into corporatism. And ironically, it's like Oedipus Rex. It kills its father, capitalism. Corporatism kills its father, capitalism, and screws its mother, democracy. Okay, once you get to where we are now with corporatism, we're on a road to destruction and annihilation. We have to get off that road immediately.
Well,
Professor, there's a lot to respond to.
Yeah, there's a lot, but I wanted to answer. First of all, I want to appreciate the reference to Homer's work as a way to elucidate the point that Cenk was making, and I've never heard that before, and I'm going to steal that, but I'll give you credit. I promise. I want to respond.
I'm going to do likewise on the point you made, Professor Wolff, on we're borrowing from the rich to give the rich tax cuts, and hence they're even getting interest on it. Yeah. I hadn't thought of it that way. That's a brilliant point.
Yeah, think of it that way, because it really is a double benefit to them. Anyway, Marxism, socialism, communism, they have changed dramatically over the last years, since I went to school and since Cenk went to school as well. Whether it was at Pennsylvania or in New England, it doesn't matter. But those changes that I've been part of and that I've worked in and that I've learned from are not known in the United States yet, because the Cold War meant that everybody who had concerns about their career kept as far away from all of that as they possibly could, lest it interfere with their going up whatever career ladder they were working on. Okay, so let me bring you up to date in 2 minutes. Right? Marxism was and is a critique of capitalism. That's all it was, and that's enough. The man lived between 1818, when he was born, and 1883, when he died. That's the 19th century. There was no Soviet Union. The closest thing to that was something called the Paris Commune, which lasted for a very few weeks in the year 1871, and Marx was involved in that, but that was an experiment in a city. Other than that, there was no quote unquote socialist experiment. That all comes after Marx is long dead. Number two, socialism, which was around before Marx, during Marx, and after Marx, was always a larger group of thinkers and activists than mere Marxists. Or Marxism is a subdivision, if you like, of what socialism has meant. And the same is true of communism. What socialism and communism were in the 19th and 20th century, they aren't anymore. In those 2 centuries, the big idea was the government, that the government would come in and at minimum regulate private capitalists doing their business. You might call that the Scandinavian kind of socialism. On to the next level. The government doesn't regulate, it comes in and owns and operates enterprise. You might call that Soviet socialism. And then you might have the most recent form of that, which is in China, which is a hybrid. Half of the Chinese economy is private capitalists regulated by the government, and the other half is the government owns and operates enterprises. Now, that hybrid has been able to grow faster than either the all private or the all state. And that's troubling the world because the growing wealth is what most of the people in the world are focused on as their top priority. Well, where have Marxists been in all of this? Have they been interested in the state running things? Yes. But they've also developed critiques of that. There's whole kinds of Marxism in which the argument is this. 1 minute now. That's all it'll take. That the issue is not state versus private. That has been a detour we should not have gotten sidetracked onto. The real issue ought to be what Volume 1 of Capital, Marx's great work, is focused on. The organization of the enterprise. The whole notion that there has to be, here we go now, Chunk, we may disagree, a capitalist or a small number of people who sit at the top and run the enterprise, who decide what to produce, what technology to use, where to locate production, and what to do with the revenue is the problem. And that the democratization of that institution, of the workplace, is the solution. For them, the transition, the revolution, if you like, from capitalism to whatever comes next, will be bringing the concept of democracy into the enterprise and rebuilding society on that foundation. I'm not here to argue for it, although I'd be glad to do that. But I'm here to tell you that's what Marxists are interested in these days. That's where their research and their agitation is moving away from the debate between the state and the private. That's a debate for people who are not Marxists, for whom it's very important. I understand that. I grew up, like Chunk did, in a world in which it was either the state or the private, and that was the great debate. That's not where Marxism is anymore.
Yeah. So I believe in a mixed economy, and that's the rational place to start, right?
Yeah.
And then I'm going to get to the place where Dr. Wolff and I would disagree, and I would love to get to a society where we finally get to that debate. Okay.
Yes.
So let me first get to all the agreements before we get to the place where we would have a debate, right?
Fair enough.
So,
Fair enough.
so first off, what is a mixed economy? Well, does the government, in the absurd, hyperbolic, black and white discussions we have in American media and politics, uh, oh, the government should run nothing. The government should run everything. Well, that's absurd, right? So the
Right.
government should run nothing. Really? They shouldn't run the police. They shouldn't run the military. And then they go, well, of course they should do that, right? But is it of course? Because we had privatized fire departments in this country. How'd that
Yep.
work out for us? And well, not well, because it turns out fire spread. And so if Bob didn't pay his fire insurance and they let his house burn down, first of all, you're deeply immoral. But second of all, it also goes to your house. And by the way, you know what's like a fire? A virus. So that's why we should have universal health care. Because if your neighbor gets sick, you might get sick as well. And so just saying, oh, you didn't pay your insurance, so your daughter should die of cancer, even if you were that deeply immoral, is not a great answer, even for your own self-interest, right?
Right.
So should the government run some things? Obviously. Then the question is, what should they run, right? And then we begin to have a rational, if we're, again, in a context like this, as opposed to mainstream media, then we have a rational conversation of, okay, for example, Finland does its education system in this way, where they ban private education. When I first started reading about that, private schools, right, at the pre-college level, I was shocked by that. And I thought there's no way that's going to work, because I believe in competition. I believe in the wisdom of the crowd. I believe in a lot of things like that, right? And then it worked. And they became number one in the world. They beat the South Koreans. How the hell did they beat the South Koreans? So I'm a person who believes in facts and evidence. So I go, okay, interesting. We should think about the Finnish model for education. The Norwegians have a terrific model on incarceration, where their recidivism rate is the lowest there is. And it's like half or even less than half of our recidivism rate. And we do say stupid things like, oh, we punish the criminals. And bubble, take care of you in prison. How's that worked out for us, allowing mass rape in prisons?
Right.
It's worked out terribly. They commit more crimes. Like,
That's
we're
right.
needlessly punishing ourselves by going with the wrong model for no reason, when we see the right model in Norway. It's right there. You could just do what they did, right? So now when you go to economic issues, so let's come back home to here. So in New York, Mamdani wins the Democratic primary. I hope he wins the general election. Now, I don't agree with a lot of his policies. Some of his policies, I go, interesting. Yeah, okay. I want, and others I go, I don't know about. And then there's a third category I just flat out don't agree, right? But so why am I in favor of Mamdani? Because I want to try, right? Cuomo says don't try anything, status quo. Corporate media says don't try anything, status quo, right? The status quo is a road to oblivion. So I'm not interested in it. So I wouldn't have thought of, let's take a couple of examples from there. I wouldn't have thought of groceries, government-run, city-run grocery stores. Would have been very low on my priority list, right? But should we try it? Yeah, okay, look, it might have, and I feel bad for the bodega owners and workers, etc., and it might have some bad consequences, but we got to try things, because it might also work, and it might cure food deserts, and it might help in ways that we don't expect. And so here's another surprise. In North Dakota, they tried a government-run bank. And again, if you're a capitalist, you go, oh, are you crazy? A government-run bank, right? I mean, in profit motive, banks are the essence of profit motive, right? That's how they work. No, it totally worked. Totally fine. Okay, well, if you say, well, I'm not going to learn from that. I'm just going to be a knucklehead. Me no like it, right? But what are you doing? You're just punishing yourself. So, okay, it turns out banks can work if they're public. Can grocery stores? I don't know. But I'd like to find out. And I'd like to find out more than I'd like to do the status quo. So free childcare in New York, great. I love that. Okay, so we're agreed on that. I think the rent control stuff's not going to work. And I think it's going to be counterproductive. But maybe, first of all, maybe I'm wrong. Okay? And second of all, let's try it all. And if the rent control thing doesn't work, but the grocery stores do and the buses do, etc., then great. We learn a couple of things and we take those to the other cities. But if you say just never change anything, just stay with the status quo, we'll never learn anything. We can disagree without hating each other, right?
Absolutely.
Right? Like, so, and sometimes we can try what Professor Wolff wants or what Zoran wants, and sometimes we can try what I want, etc. As long as we're trying these different things. So, look, mixed economy is, in my opinion, the obvious right answer, right? And so, and then one by one, you determine, can banks be run by the government or not? Can grocery stores be run or not? I think once you get to sneakers and jeans and hamburgers, the government is going to be an abject failure in running those businesses. Okay, but maybe I'm wrong. Go for it. Government burgers. See if people like it. Okay, I don't know. Okay, so I'm not a huge fan of centralized planning, but I am a huge fan of experimentation. So finally, the place where Dr. Wolff and I would get to a disagreement is if we got to this magical place where we solved all of those other problems. We defeated corporatism, we took money out of politics, we're mainly serving the average American and the middle class and the poor, and then that's creating a great economy. We've solved all that. We're not getting into wars with Iran or China, we're just doing economic trade. We solved all of it, okay? We're like nearly in nirvana at this point. Then we have a debate about, hey, then can worker co-ops be a better answer? Should the government run more things and see if that works, right? Should they try the sneaker business and see if that works? How can workers run things? Can it work in some areas but not in other areas? I know there's a workers co-op, I think in Spain, that worked really well. Okay, yep. Interesting. Tell me more, right? And so and do some experiments around that. But right now, we're a million miles from that. We got to go the first 100, the first 1,000, the first 100,000 miles first, and then have that discussion.
Professor Wolff, do you want to add anything? Also, we're running a few minutes late, so this will probably be the last.
Very, very quick. Most of it, again, I agree. I'm very open to let's take a look at these. I expect any transition, but let me do it differently. I teach economic history courses. The transition from feudalism to capitalism didn't happen overnight. They didn't stop one system and erect another. Nothing like that happened. There were lots of experiments, which looking back, we can see these were experiments in going from a lord-serf model to an employer-employee model. It was tried partially for a while, then it backtracked. It failed in some cases, succeeded in that, and it was a trial and error process before you had the general transition. I am assuming that we will have all kinds of experiments between government-run and private-run. But I also would add, perhaps sooner than Cenk might, that we also ought to try between hierarchical and democratic enterprise organization. And let's see, we might find the same thing, that certain kinds of activity lend themselves better in terms of the outcome to one structure than another. And then we would argue, well, then how do we make a decision collectively, democratically, about what parts of our economy we want to be organized in state versus private, and what part in cooperative versus hierarchical organizations of enterprise. As long as we're open to it, as long as we recognize that these options are there, as long as a few of us are allowed in some public fora to argue why we think this kind of change of enterprise would be therapeutic for the problems that modern capitalism has, then I'm very happy to submit that to the population's experimentation and for a democratic decision about how to move forward. I don't want that to happen with us excluded in our critical perspectives, because there again, that predisposes the outcome to be the status quo yet again. That's why everything that we've just been saying, both of us, are designed to try to prevent that from happening, to have the conversation open up enough so that our perspectives are part of what is to be discussed here.
Yeah.
By the way, just a conclusion, I don't want this to be an appeal. I want to make this a little scarier for the audience. I do think that, at least as for the United States, my country, we are falling apart. This is a society that is having more and more difficulties, to the point where someone like me, who never said this before, is now talking about the implosion of a system. We better have these conversations, because the more options we can talk about and think about, the more the experiments will be diverse enough to give us a future, other than to have the implosion take us into places do not want to go. And I do believe that the right wing of America made the decisions because of the Cold War that as the system becomes intolerable, to move sharply to the right in the hopes that those people can solve the problem as they promised. Mr. Trump is not solving the problems of this economy, not even close. And that failure will dawn on everybody. It's already visible in the Epstein noise, and it's coming, and it's going to be a moment, and I don't think it's far off, when you're going to see the population veer to the left, looking to see whether those on the left might offer a better shot at doing something to fix the system now that the right wing had its chance and didn't do it very well. I see that already around me, even in my conservative colleagues in economics, which is not, in case anyone is wondering, a progressive tradition or a progressive discipline. It isn't. Very status quo. But even among them, I'm beginning to discern that shift. And those who are skeptical, let me remind you, when capitalism came close to collapse in the years after 1929, the working class of this country went sharply to the left. It joined two socialist parties, a communist party, and it joined the CIO with the greatest labor organizing drive the country has ever seen. And so the idea that the population can't go to the left at a moment of crisis, that's negated by the history of the country itself.
Yeah, it's funny because I was going to end on the same thing because I was going to say I don't want to get to pitchforks. That's a terrible outcome. And by the way, when you get to pitchforks, they might go populist right in a dangerous authoritarian way, right?
Yep.
So we've got
Correct.
to avoid the pitchforks. And part of what I tell the business community is, hey, you knuckleheads, when the pitchforks come, one, you can go in an authoritarian direction, then you're not in charge anymore. Then that one authoritarian leader's in charge, okay?
Right.
And by the way, then you all become threats to him because you all have power. Look at what happened in Russia. All the oligarchs who agreed with Putin got promoted. The ones who didn't got killed or put in jail, okay? So be careful what you wish for. Number two, or they can go communist. You want that instead, right? And so those business leaders, they don't understand the infinite greed, right? They can't understand that they're headed towards a brick wall. And I feel like I'm a capitalist going, veer, turn. You're going to hit the wall at 100 miles an hour. You're crazy. And look at what's happening with the right. The right is getting angrier and angrier. And because of Trump's betrayal of them, the Epstein files is the tip of the iceberg. The reason why it's so important is because it woke up a lot of Trump voters like, oh, Trump might be lying too. Oh, Trump said he was against the establishment, but it might turn out it was just a more sophisticated trick and he is the establishment, right? But once they wake up to that, then they turn and go, wait, he just took Medicaid away from my family. Oh my God, my daughter's sick. Now I'm angrier. Okay, now I'm really angry, right? And he said he was going to deliver this, and that. He didn't deliver any of that, and the rich got richer. And we added $4 trillion to the debt. And the anger continues. Look, you can ignore the anger on the left for a long, long time. But once the right gets angry, oh boy, buckle up and brace for impact, okay? And you saw part of that on January 6th, okay? And you're going to see a lot more of it. So we gotta get our heads straight here. We're headed on a very dark and dangerous road. We have to get off this road. We have to get back to democracy. Democracy is open to all ideas, trying different ideas. Remember how the states were supposed to be, a test area for all of our different ideas in a democracy? That was supposed to be part of the reason for states' rights, et cetera. We got to get back to that laboratory of democracy. We've got to try different things. We've got to try some of Professor Wolff's ideas, some of my ideas, et cetera. But good news is in the beginning, all reasonable people who aren't corrupt agree on so many things. Look at what this conversation, right? We agree on 90% of it to begin. You got to get the money out. If you don't get the money out, we're all screwed, right? And so
Agreed.
last thing is, I restarted Rebellion Pack because I want to give them a positive option. Again, I agree with Dr. Wolff. Okay, so when they realize that Trump screwed them, they're going to give the left one last chance, the country at whole, at large. Okay, they're going to turn their eyes to the one thing they didn't try: populist left. Okay.
Yeah.
They've tried establishment Democrats. They've started establishment Republicans. They've now tried the fake populism of Donald Trump. There's only one thing left: Bernie-led economic populism on the left. Okay.
Right.
So that's what Rebellion Pac's about. And what we're doing is we're saying, come join the rebellion. It's a rebellion against the Democratic leadership. It's a rebellion against Trump. It's a rebellion against the establishment. Okay. So who are the candidates? It's like Ro Khanna, which is the heir to Bernie's economic wing. You've got supporters like Nina Turner, but you also have supporters like Dan Osborne, who's an independent. It's built around a populist plank where, number one, none of the candidates are allowed to take corporate PAC money. So they're unchained from the donors, okay? And then the six planks real quick is get money out of politics, anti-war, paid family leave, higher minimum wage, don't let private equity buy our homes, and obviously we should negotiate drug prices. If you're a capitalist and you say you should not negotiate drug prices, you're not actually a capitalist. You just don't know it, okay? I mean, that's the most anti-capitalist thing I could ever think of, where you're not allowed to negotiate, okay? So these are very popular policies. They're Democratic policies, but they're populist. They all have over 2/3 popularity, and we already have amazing candidates side up. J.D. Schultz is going to win the Senate seat in Iowa. He's in rebellion. Ojeda made up 43 points in a plus 54 Republican district in West Virginia. He's now running in a plus 9 in North Carolina for the Republicans. That's a red district that people think is unwinnable. He's going to win it. Plus 9 is a cakewalk for Ojeda. Okay, Randy Bryce, Iron Stash, Iron Worker. These are J.D. Schulten's a baseball player. Randy's an iron worker. Ojeda's a 24-year veteran. These are real Americans who are fighting for other real Americans. You give them that option, and America's going to love that option. They're going to love voting for an iron worker who says we should all have higher wages, lower drug prices, and you should be able to afford a home. So rebellionpact.com if you want to help there. Fightcorruption.us if you want to help there. And this is what we do on the Young Turks.
Perfect. Thank you so much, Cenk and Professor Wolff.